Our scripture today is found in the book of Mark, chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. Jesus had just kind of confronted the Pharisees and the scribes who were complaining because Jesus' disciples weren't following their traditions, yet they were doing what was right. And Jesus is going to Mark is going to show us kind of the polar opposite of the Pharisees and Sadducees in this next section. And so let's look at Mark chapter 7, verse 24 through 30. From there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house and wanted no one to know it, but he could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. But Jesus said to her, "Let the little children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." And she answered and said to him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For this saying, go your way. The demon has gone out of your daughter." And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out and her daughter lying on the bed. I'm going to tell you, when coming to this scripture, it's one of those ones where it's like, I struggle with it because he calls her a dog. And we kind of think of Jesus, the only people he's really kind of that brazen to seems to be the scribes and the Pharisees. Right? He insults them left and right. He calls them broods of viper. He calls them all these different things. And here we have this passage where he calls this woman a dog. And we have to understand that. We have to understand all of the context to really understand what he's really saying here. And so it says first that he went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And so we have to understand a couple of historical things about Tyre and Sidon, right? Tyre is probably the arch rivals of the Jews, right? They hate the Jews more than anybody else. And the Jewish people, in return, hated the people from Tyre more than anybody else, right? They were rivals. They were the enemies, kind of a thing. And they were also their next-door neighbors, right? This is about 20 miles north of where he was coming from. And so this is also the place where Baal worship, which if you remember your Old Testament, well, this is where Baal worship was at its peak. This is where it originated from. This is where the evil queen Jezebel came from. Right? And so he goes up into Tyre. The Bible doesn't tell us why he goes up to Tyre. Some have argued that the reason he goes up to Tyre is really to get away, to have some intimate teachings with his disciples, right? They argue that in part because it says that he went up there and he didn't want anyone to know it, right, when he entered the house. And some argue that he was just going for rest. We don't know if it was rest or to teach the disciples. Some argue it was to teach the disciples in part because in Matthew's account of this same thing, in Matthew 15, when the woman keeps asking him to save her daughter, the disciples ask if he could shut her up. Right? Maybe not quite those words, but it is about that rude. That they're like, can't you stop her from screaming? Right? And so he's there to do private things. But while he's there to do private things, he's still willing to minister. He's still willing to minister. And so this woman comes to him, and she has a problem. Right? Her little daughter, her young daughter, has a demonic spirit. I have thought about that quite often. We tend to look at our world today, and we don't see demonic spirits the way they saw demonic spirits. But the reality is, if you were to look at our world today, you would recognize that there is a lot of demonic oppression out there. That there are a lot of people under the influence of demonic control. And many of us may find that we have family members who are in similar situations. And so we have this woman who is not Jewish. She is Greek. In other words, she's not Jewish. Syrophoenician, she's Canaanite. Right? Remember that the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, and the Canaanites, they really didn't get along. So she really is an outsider. She is not one of the children of Israel. And she comes to Jesus and she says, "Could you cure my daughter?" And she doesn't even say it like that. She knows he can cure it. She asks him to cure it. "Please cure my daughter. Please let her be healed." Most people believe that she has probably gone to every possible solution she could have before coming to Christ. Because remember, the Jews are the enemy, right? The Tyres, the people from where she is, and the people from Israel, they're not friends. So she comes to him, and she doesn't come, "Hey, I know you can do it." She comes to him begging. She comes to him pleading. She comes to him downcast. She throws herself at his feet, right? And asks if he could cure her daughter. And that's where he gives that expression, no, let the children be filled first. This is a very important thing to note. He doesn't tell her no, right? Many of us look at that expression, and if we just brush over it and we see him call her a dog, we brush over the fact that he says, "Let the children be filled first." Right? No, he's got to give it to the children first. Well, who are the children? Well, the Jewish people are the children. Right? And this is not something that is new to Christ. This is actually quite important to understand. You see, he made a promise, God did, to Abraham. Way back in Genesis, God promised Abraham, he said, "Abraham, I'm going to be there's blessings, I will bless you. And multiplying, I will multiply you. Your descendants as the stars of the heaven and as the sand which is on the seashore. And your descendants shall possess the gates of their enemies. In your seed, all the nations of the earth shall be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." Right, so God promised Abraham that his seed would hold the gates of their enemies. And by coming to the Jews first, by making sure the children got it first, he gave them the gates. Right? The entrance to heaven was through Christ alone, right? And Christ's ministry was to the Jewish people. In fact, it's here in Mark chapter 7, which is the first time we really see Jesus leave the Jewish nation. It's the first time he's gone out of Jewish territory, because his ministry was to the Jewish people. But it doesn't stay just with Christ, right? Paul says it in Romans. He says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation, for everyone who believes, for the Jew first, and also for the Greek." And he says it a little bit later, "But glory, honor, and peace to everyone who works what is good, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek, for there is no partiality with God." Right? The message came to the Jewish people first, because God wanted to bless the world through the seeds of Abraham. And so Jesus delivers the message to the Jew first. And so he says to her, "Let the children be filled first." In fact, in the Matthew passage, he says it this way. Let me find it. In the Matthew passage, when the disciples ask him to quiet her, he says, "I was not sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Right? My ministry, in other words, is to the Jewish people. When he sent the disciples out, the first time he sent them out to the Jews only. He said, "Don't go in the paths of the Gentiles." Right? Don't give the gospel to the Gentiles yet. Right? Because first it was supposed to be to the Jews, and then when the Jews rejected it, then it got sent to the rest of the world. And it was sent to the rest of the world through a few faithful Jewish people. Right? It is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. Right? It is not good. It'd be like my wife cooking a meal, let's go with macaroni and cheese, because I had that the last 2 days, macaroni and cheese, and just giving the plate to the dogs instead of to the children. And saying to the children, well, when the dogs are done, you can have whatever's left over. Right? We don't do that. And so Jesus says, look, let the children be filled first. For it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. He calls her a dog. There is a note to be made. The New King James translates this with the word little as an adjective because there were 2 Greek words for the word dog. Right? One of them was the wild dog, the disgusting dog, the bad dog kind of thing, the one that ran in packs and ate people in carnal, dead things and all that stuff. It's the word that is used in Proverbs 26, verse 11 in the Septuagint, as a dog returns to his own vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. Right? That word dog is that heavy dog. The word dog that Jesus is using is the term more for the pet. Right? It's for the pet that you would keep in the house, that would eat up the scraps, that would clean up the floor for you. So he's not calling her this wild beast, but he is still relating her to the pet. And some of us may take offense to that. Right? If somebody were to call me a dog, I might take offense to it. Right? But this lady doesn't. This lady doesn't. Right? She answers and says to him, yes, Lord. Right? Not, I'm not a dog. What are you doing calling me a dog? Right? She says, yes, Lord. Yet, even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs. Right? She doesn't take offense to it because she recognizes that she is not one of the children yet. That she is one of the outsiders. Right? We often have this notion, especially those of us who have grown up in the church, that we're all children of God, right? And I mention this quite often, that Jesus actually tells us, no, that's not the case, right? You are a child of God when you have come to God, when you have submitted to God, when you have given your life to God. That's when you're a child of God, right? In John chapter 8, he has that conversation with the Pharisees, and they say, well, our father Abraham, and he says, Abraham wasn't your father. If he was, you would have done what Abraham done. But your father is that of the devil. Right? That's the state we're all born into. And this lady recognizes that she is not born into the Jewish faith. She is not born as a child of God, but she is the dog outside. The reality is, we were all born dogs. We were all born outside, and we've been given the offer to come in. We've been given an offer to become the children. And so we have this lady who comes to Jesus, and she asks, and he calls her a dog, and she accepts that because she realizes something. She realizes that she is not worthy. But she still has hope in him. Right? She still has hope in him because she knows that he has what she needs. I question myself, I question all of us, and I would encourage you to question yourself, do you come recognizing that you are not worthy? Do you come recognizing that we need what he has? And we are not worthy of it. He does not owe it to us. But he gives it to us because he loves us. I love my father. My father is an interesting fellow. Whenever he comes over to our house for dinner or whatever, you know where the dogs are going to be. They're going to be right next to my father. Because my father likes the dogs, and my mother said he can't have any dogs. And so when my father is at the table, you know, every once in a while his hand falls down. You go, Dad, what are you doing? He's feeding the dogs, right? The dogs want the food. They know they need the food. And he gives it to them. Christ says, look, I have to give it to the children first. But then he takes off his own plate and he gives to the dogs. There are some things to note about that, right? The food that the dogs get and the foods that the kids get are the same, right? When the crumbs fall off the table, it's from the same piece of bread, from the same piece of meat. It's the same broccoli that nobody wants to eat, right? Okay, my wife likes the broccoli, and the kids think it's okay too. I'm the one who doesn't want to eat it. Right? But it's the same thing, right? The dogs and the children, they're eating of the same food. They need the same thing. They need Jesus. But it's interesting to look at this passage. Not only does she accept that she is a dog, not only does she accept that she needs what he has, but she also will not accept no. She continues to ask, even when he ignores her, right? We see that in the Matthew parallel, right? In the Matthew parallel, she calls him, she says, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. And it says, but he answered her not a word. Right? He was silent. He didn't answer her. And so she kept asking. She kept asking to the point that his disciples needed to say, could you send her away, for she cries out after us. She continues to ask. You know, we need what Jesus has. We know that he is the hope. Do we continue to ask for the things that we need? And it's interesting. I look at this and I go, she's not even asking for herself. She's asking for her daughter. Are there people in your life that you need to keep bringing before God because they're not there yet? Because this woman teaches us that we need to keep asking. That we need to keep asking God for that loved one who's found themselves in demon oppression. We need to keep asking. And for our own selves, we need to keep asking, God, I'm still struggling with this. Can you help me out with that? We need to continually be persevering. And then there have been some who've said, well, why didn't he just answer in the first place? Why didn't he just say, yes, your daughter's saved, go away? Right? Well, if he did that, we wouldn't have had much of a story, would we? We wouldn't have much to talk about here. The other thing that happens because he didn't do that is we get a great image of what it is to come to Christ, what it is to have that saving faith. Right? Because a saving faith doesn't give up. A saving faith knows he is the only answer, knows he is the only hope. Because he is. And so a saving faith perseveres. A saving faith recognizes that it's not worthy. And I love the way he sends her away in the Matthew passage. O woman, great is your faith. Let it be to your desire. In verse 29 of Mark, he says, for this saying, go your way. Right? Because you understand, right? You understand that you need me. You understand you're not worthy. You understand that you just need to keep at it. You have faith. It says, because you have that, the demon has gone out of your daughter. So let me encourage you that the problems you are facing today, have faith in the one who can take care of it. Let me encourage you that the people you are praying for today, have faith that God is doing something. Keep praying. Keep pushing on. Because when we have great faith, He's willing to answer. He's willing to respond. When she went home, her daughter was lying in bed. There are some who believe that she was lying in bed because she was exhausted, because the demon had left her. But it tells us very clearly that the demon was gone. She was cured. Because that is who God is. And we're just like this woman. We're just like her. We're dogs. But it's okay, because He invites us to become children. Will you bow with me in prayer?